President de Klerk, what does it feel like the day that you were able to feel that feeling of releasing Nelson Mandela?
It was the culmination of an action plan. He has been in jail long enough. He was sent to jail by a proper court, having been defended by the best counsel that was available in South Africa. He was planning in his young days to overthrow the government through violent means. That constitutes a crime in Canada and wherever. But he served his sentence. And while in jail, in the later years, he was beginning to say we need a negotiated solution. He committed himself to peaceful solutions. So for me, it was the culmination of an action plan to free the man who could bring a majority of the black people to the negotiation table, and releasing him brought justice to him.
Mandela, that release meant just one thing: the chance to carry on his lifelong fight for a South Africa where one man meant one vote and no man controlled another. Just 3 months after his release, Mandela was chosen to lead the African National Congress in an historic first official meeting with the government. After 3 days, the two sides committed themselves to peaceful change. Witnesses might never have suspected how bitter these enemies had been. The Transkei region of South Africa, a remote land of rolling hills and glistening streams along the Indian Ocean. Here, on July 18, 1918, Nelson Mandela was born into African royalty. His father, a tribal chief, named his son Roli Shasha, which means troublemaker. The world of the young boy was a completely African one, unchanged for hundreds of years.
He was raised in a world apart. It was basically an African world. He didn't grow up amidst whites and have the feeling of inferiority that a lot of Africans do, because his whole world was the world of his mother and father, his world of his village. It was a ritualistic society. Families mattered. He was a herd boy. He went out and herded cattle in the morning. He drank milk from the cow's udders. It was the most simple kind of existence you can imagine.
His father was wealthy by local standards. He had enough cattle to pay for 4 wives, who bore him 13 children. His third wife, Roli Shasha's mother, lived in a neighboring village, and there the young boy spent his early childhood.
It was an idyllic world. I mean, he would stick fight with the other boys, and he was a great stick fighter. They would steal mealies or corn in the evening and roast it under the stars.
But there was a whole other world beyond his village, a white world that the young boy knew only well enough to fear.
Regarded whites as a boy as kind of gods that came from some other place that he didn't know about, and occasionally visited them, and he looked on them with great awe and fear, because he saw the way the elders and even the way his father related to whites, and he knew, the way children know, that there was something going on here that was a little bit frightening to him and daunting.
Roli Shasha was just 7 when this white world had its first great impact on him. his black village teacher decided he'd need a name better suited to a white society.
When I went to school, the lady teacher, Miss Mdingane, asked, "What is your name?" I told him my African name, Khorishlan. He says, "No, I don't want that one. You must have a Christian name." So I say, "No, I don't have one." She says, from today you are going to be Nelson.
So henceforth, he would be known to the world as Nelson Mandela.
The idyllic life of a village child ended abruptly for Nelson when he was just 9. His father died, and he was taken from his mother to live at the Great Place under the guardianship of the regent, the ruler of the Tembu people. Here, he would be groomed for leadership.
It was like the Emerald City to him. It was Oz. It was fantastic. It was beyond all of his imaginings how grand this place was. This is where the king lived, the regent lived. And he went there and he was, astonished by the grandeur of it.
The Great Place was the center of life for the Tembu people. When issues needed to be resolved, chiefs from the outlying areas would gather here for meetings with the regent.
Nelson watched these in great wonderment and awe, because all of these chiefs were very grand men, they were very articulate, they were very strong, and they would have this meeting, and each of them would speak in turn, and many of them criticized the regent very harshly, and Nelson, as a boy, was amazed by this, and to him it became a symbol of what democracy is really like.
The regent reared Nelson as his own son, and groomed him to be an advisor to the next king. For his education, Nelson was sent to an elite boarding school. When Nelson finished boarding school, he was sent to Fort Hare University, the Harvard of Black South Africa. Here, he faced his first moral dilemma. He had been voted to student office in elections he considered unfair. When he refused the position, he was expelled. The issue was not of great note, but Nelson saw it as a matter of principle and would not budge. His stubborn determination to follow his sense of right would characterize him for the rest of his life. The 21-year-old Nelson now returned to the Transkei to discover that the regent had arranged a bride for him. Nelson was shocked. He was not ready for married life, nor was he willing to marry a local girl. So he ran away to Johannesburg. Johannesburg in 1941 opened his eyes to the real South Africa. Here was a world of injustice, driven by the separation of the races. It was a world he'd never before had to face.
I certainly think that his removal and relative protection from the main weight of white racism would have saved him from the crushing impact that so many, the psychological impact that so many black South Africans did suffer.
South Africa in 1941 was not just a country of Africans ruled by whites. It was a country in which Africans were forced to face their diminished status every day of their lives, from morning till night. Separation from whites, that's what defined absolutely an African's life. From the hospital he was born in, to the bus that took him home, to the school he attended. When he reached adulthood, his job was an African's only job. His home, an African's only home. He could be stopped anytime, anywhere, and forced to show his passbook, documents which listed the areas he could enter. For the first time in his life, Mandela saw himself as a black man in a white society.
In a strange way, the racism of the city was one of the first things that defined him to himself as a black man. And in a way, it started that internal fire burning of resentment that eventually ignited into full-fledged rebellion.
Very soon after his arrival in Johannesburg, in his search for work, he was introduced to Walter Sisulu, a prominent African businessman active in the African National Congress. It was 1944, near the end of World War II, and a new era was dawning in resistance politics in South Africa. Black South Africans were working in factories in support of this war, being fought in the name of freedom and democracy, which they were denied. It was in the spirit of these ideals that Nelson and the other younger, more militant members of the ANC formed a youth league within the organization to force a more radical approach.
He impressed me at once. His demeanor, his manner of approach, and he was a bright and lively young man.
And joined the African National Congress the oldest black political organization in South Africa.
It was when I came into the African National Congress that I realized that cultures are only a part of the African people. That the task of the ANC was to unite the African people and out of them build a nation.
In 1948, the nationalist government was voted into power by the white electorate in South Africa, and the battle lines were clearly drawn.
Comrade Oliver said, well, I like this, because we now know we have an enemy in power, and I think that we're going to have a better opportunity of mobilizing our people.
Yes, the Pietermaritzburg resolution makes provision for a campaign of non-cooperation with the government, and we are presently studying plans to implement this aspect of the resolution.
Now, if Dr. Verwoerd's government doesn't give you the kind of concessions that you want sometime soon, is there any likelihood of violence?
There are many people who feel that the reaction of the government to our stay at home, ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, notwithstanding our clear declaration that this campaign is being run on peaceful and non-violent lines, close the chapter as far as our methods of political struggle are concerned. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people. And I think the time has come for us to consider, in the light of our experiences in this stay at home, whether the methods which we have applied so far are adequate.
Sisulu saw how powerful a leader of the fight Nelson could become. At this time, the African National Congress was a group made up of activists fighting to end racial injustice through the most moderate means: boycotts, letters, and petitions. For Sisulu, being presented with a man as educated and as regal as Nelson was a dream come true. With Sisulu's help, Mandela started working as a clerk in a law firm during the day and continued his legal studies at night.
Walter started taking him to meetings, and just as he had done as a young boy, he would observe, he would listen to the speeches, and he would see the gamut of opinion, and he started to get politicized.
My approach was that I have got the right type of a man. If I can help, I want to develop him as much as I could.
The young law clerk who'd hesitated to speak at meetings was shy no longer. He and the others in the Youth League would soon take the ANC in a new direction that would redefine forever the struggle for freedom in South Africa. 1946. Nelson Mandela was 28 years old and beginning to settle into a relatively comfortable life in Johannesburg. His firstborn child was a son, and for the first time he had a home of his own and could enjoy a normal and happy life. But it was not to last. Life for every black South African was about to change. In 1948, white Afrikaans nationalists came to power on the promise of a total separation of the races. The new government quickly adopted brutally repressive laws.
Now know we have an enemy in power, and I think that we're going to have a better opportunity of mobilizing our people.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
The system was called apartheid and was intended to maintain white supremacy forever. Blacks understood at once that they were now the enemy in their own country.
And Nelson himself saw the change in South African life. He saw these laws being passed, and he saw the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, as he once described it, and that focused his mind, focused his own political ambitions.
Determined to fight back, Mandela and other activists launched the Defiance Campaign, a program of non-violent civil disobedience. The campaign spread like wildfire across the black community, from city to city. Africans by the thousands took political action for the first time in their lives and disobeyed the apartheid laws. It was Mandela who organized support for the campaign, and its popular success made him known across the country.
Mandela represented a watershed. The shift from the old constitutional approach to the more defiant, assertive, aggressive approach, and that of course gave him a particular image. He became a symbol of militancy to the youth of that time, and he carried that through into the ANC.
By the end of 1952, Mandela had become such a thorn in the government's side that it decided he had to be silenced, and he was served with a banning order. This severely restricted his freedom of speech and movement. He could not attend public meetings or speak to more than one person at a time. He could not even attend his own son's birthday party. From this point on, Mandela would have to continue the fight from behind the scenes. The first to suffer from the rising pressure was his family.
He tells the story of how on those rare nights that he was home to tuck his children into bed, his son might say, "Daddy, why aren't you home more? Why aren't you tucking us in every night?" And he would have to say these terrible, horrible words, as he described it, which is that there are hundreds of thousands, millions of other children in the world, and I have to be concerned about them as well.
Mandela was fighting apartheid not just politically, but professionally. He and his friend Oliver Tambo opened the only black law firm in South Africa.
This was the mecca for every black person in South Africa who had any legal problems. There was just this one law firm, and people looked up to Mandela and Tambo. And to get into his office every day, he had to walk over dozens of people who were just waiting in the hallways to see him.
Oh, he was the best dressed young man among all of us. He walked tall, and he cross-examined with the witnesses with great confidence. This upset some of the magistrates that he appeared before.
But Mandela faced as much racism in the courtroom as he did on the streets of Johannesburg.
He had white witnesses for cross-examination who refused or tried to refuse to answer questions from a black man who'd never been asked a question by a black man, never had been in an adversarial relationship with a black man where a black man actually had some authority over them. That was revolutionary in those days.
Meanwhile, the government continued to ruthlessly impose apartheid and crush any opposition. Whole communities were forced out of their homes, sometimes at gunpoint, and relocated to barren lands outside the cities. But as the repression increased, so did Mandela's will.
As he saw the national power tightening the screws on life in South Africa, he realized that there was no exit for him. This was his destiny, and things would only get worse on the political front. He couldn't get out now, and he didn't want to.
24 hours a day, Mandela was fighting apartheid every way he could. His whole life had become consumed with the struggle.
In 1955, the ANC and other organizations called upon people of all races to gather in Cape Town to approve the Freedom Charter, a blueprint for a free, democratic and multiracial South Africa, in which all races would be treated equally. Nelson Mandela, one of the chief organizers of the gathering, was banned by the government from attending and was forced to watch proceedings from the sidelines.
Then in December of 1956, the state finally made its move. In a nationwide sweep, police arrested Mandela and 155 other activists and charged them with high treason. Nelson's arrest, on top of his unending political work, was more than his wife Evelyn could bear. After 12 years of marriage, she left him. Alone now, Mandela stood trial for treason, and it would take 4 long years before he was found not guilty. Nelson's personal life changed happily during this difficult period. On his way home from the trial one day, he spotted a young woman at a bus stop whose beauty dazzled him. Her name was Winnie Madikizela. He managed to wrangle a date with her, and by the end of the date, he decided to marry her.
Winnie, in a way, was a kind of modern woman in a way that Evelyn had not been. Winnie was one of the kind of earliest modern African women. She was independent. She had her own opinions about things. He saw in her what she later became, which was a feisty, independent, strong woman, and he liked that. He wanted someone that he felt was his equal.
On June 14th, 1958, Nelson and Winnie were married in a small church in the Transkei. The marriage brought Nelson enormous joy, and his deep love for Winnie would fortify him for the struggles ahead. His life was about to take a dramatic turn. In 1960, in a town called Sharpeville, the state showed the violence it was willing to commit to prevent change. At a protest, South African police fired more than 700 times into a crowd of black men, women, and children. 69 people were killed. Rioting quickly erupted throughout the country. The government declared a state of emergency and outlawed the African National Congress.
Combination of this massacre and the banning of peaceful resistance was really the watershed point at which the ANC, led by Mandela at that point, not that he was not yet the leader of the organization, but it was his thinking led the organization to adopt a strategy of guerrilla violence.
With the African National Congress outlawed, Mandela now went underground. One day he was a public figure, by the next he disappeared.
When Mandela went underground, of course, it added to the romantic image of the man. He became very much the idol and the glamorous figure, the heroic figure to the young black South Africans particularly. I mean, they were electrified by his name from that point onwards.
While in hiding, he formed the armed wing of the ANC, Umkhonto iSizwe, or Spear of the Nation, which began to carry out strategic acts of sabotage.
Are you planning any more campaigns of non-cooperation?
For Nelson Mandela, becoming a secret commander meant a life on the run, where his every move had to be carefully planned.
Everything had to be thought out in advance, where he was going to stay that night, how he was going to get from point A to point B. He became a military tactician just in the way he had to live his life, because he had to plan it out like an elaborate campaign every day.
In January of 1962, he was smuggled out of South Africa and traveled extensively around the continent and to London, gathering support and funding for the armed struggle. He received military training in Algeria and Ethiopia. Now, at the age of 43, and away from South Africa, he felt true freedom for the first time in his life. But it would be short-lived. Although he was the most wanted man back home, he would return to continue the fight. In July, Mandela slipped back into South Africa, but was soon captured by the police. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaving the country illegally and inciting people to strike. While he was in prison, security police raided the ANC's underground headquarters. Its military high command was captured and charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Mandela was brought to stand trial with them.
This really was such a shock to all of us, because it was the cream of our liberation people that were taken. A few of them escaped, but these were the people that one really counted on to lead us. And they were all taken in one swoop.
This time, the government's case was rock solid, and Nelson Mandela knew it would seek the ultimate penalty, death.
So that is how we went into the trial, expecting the worst. And his attitude right through was to keep us prepared for this eventuality. So much so that as the trial drew to a close, again he persuaded us that even if we were sentenced to death, there should be no appeal.
Mandela saw the trial as possibly his last chance to tell the world about the South Africa he lived in and the one he dreamed of.
What they were trying to do was to indict the whole South African system. Mandela said, I want to put South Africa on trial. I want to put the oppressors on trial. They would, in effect, plead guilty to the crimes and say, yes, but you are the real criminals.
And so Mandela refused to defend himself. The defense would legitimize the state's case. Instead, he made a passionate address to the court that lasted 4 hours.
I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
June 12, 1964. At the South African Supreme Court in Pretoria, Nelson Mandela, now 45 years old, was convicted with 7 others of conspiracy to overthrow the government. They were sentenced to life in prison to be served at Robben Island, the Alcatraz of South Africa, a rocky and barren island surrounded by rough seas some 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town.
He spelled it out to us. Our job is to crush your spirits, and this is what we're going to do. In 5 years' time, nobody will know the name of Mandela.
Robben Island was an unimaginably harsh place, completely cut off from the outside world, a place where all life and all time was stopped cold. Here, there were no clocks allowed, no newspapers. The lights burned 24 hours a day. In his first year here, Nelson was allowed just 1 visit from his wife Winnie. It would be another 2 years before he could see her again. It would be 20 years before he could even touch her hand. Inside Robben Island, apartheid was even more brutally imposed than it was outside. Even in the very necessities of life, Mandela and the other black prisoners received the least of everything.
When we had to change into prison clothes, they were all given short pants, I was given long pants. They were given no socks. And the regulation stipulated they should have been wearing sandals, or they were given shoes as a favor. When it came to food again, there was discrimination. Less sugar for them, just boiled mealies at lunch, no bread for them. Less meat, less fish.
From the first day, Mandela was determined never to give in, never to allow himself to be defeated here. He would never submit to disrespect or mistreatment. On the contrary, he would demand the respect due any man. It was this certainty about what's right that allowed him to survive here.
If you enter prison with a negative state of mind, it is hell. Every minute of it can be hell. But when you enter with a positive spirit, as we said, we entered the island or prison, knowing that this is the struggle on another terrain. It was hard, and they did everything to crush our spirits. They failed.
One place Mandela and his fellow prisoners took their stand was at the limestone quarry. Every day, for 13 years, they were marched here, and from morning till night, under the brutal sun, they would do the back-breaking, blistering work of crushing rock. But they also made clear here how they would and would not be treated.
We wouldn't run. We'd never call them boss. We'd work at the pace which we could work at. We are not going to kill ourselves working. When they demanded that when we are breaking stones, we should have a bucket full of stones, we said we'll do what we can.
Once they realized we were determined to do that, there is no way in which they can push us. They had to talk to us. They recognize leadership, which is usually a difficult thing in jail. They now recognize that Mandela Nelson was the leader.
Mandela's behavior astounded his guards. They'd never been confronted by a prisoner with such dignity and self-assurance. That this was someone black as well was dumbfounding. But over the years, Mandela's demeanor succeeded in changing their attitude towards him.
With Nelson Mandela, there came a time when they realized that, look, let's not touch this man. It seems like taboo. The respect started mounting. But not out of a myth, out of Mandela's conduct. He would try to shake the hand of a warder in the morning. He will say, "Goeiemorgen, good morning." He will ask about your children. He would inquire after their wives. They came to fear this person. They came to respect this person. But they came to love Nelson Mandela. And he came to forgive everybody.
He was never defeated, no. Depressed he might have been the fact that he was away from his family His children didn't ever see them grow up, and I think that was very sad for him.
The hardship of being away from his family became almost unbearable when his oldest son, Tembi, died in a car accident in 1969. Nelson was not permitted to attend the funeral. Later, he would say that Tembi's death left a hole in his heart that could never be filled.
Got a telegram. The announcement was just a telegram. They called me to the reception office and told me this, and I just took the telegram and went back. And I asked for permission to attend the funeral, but that was refused. I was really devastated to lose a son, your eldest son, and I had no opportunity of paying my respects to his memory by attending the funeral. That was very devastating.
Outside, Winnie Mandela was still fighting against apartheid and being persecuted for it.
This was a cause of great anguish for him. His children had to be sent away to school. They had no money. Winnie was banned and living away from the children. This really tortured him.
Nelson and Winnie had been married for just 6 years when he first went to Robben Island. But the nearly 30 years he was forcibly separated from her never dimmed his love.
I think his passion for Winnie grew while he was in prison. He talks about how while he was in prison, he would touch his nose to a picture of her that he had and experience that same electric thrill that he experienced when he touched her nose in person.
I was thinking of her, of course, every day. And also I wanted to give her encouragement to know that there is somebody somewhere who cares for her.
Yes.
I had been married, you see, for 4 years when I was sent to jail. And she was a very young person, inexperienced. She had 2 children, and she couldn't bring them up properly because of the harassment and persecution by the police. That was a very difficult moment for me. She was being hounded from one job to the other by the police. They would go to the employer and say, by keeping this woman here, you're starting trouble. The feeling of frustration and helplessness was there because there was nothing I could do about it.
My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people.
You're sentenced to life in prison. You're gone for many, many years. She has a life outside. She meets other men. How did you deal with that?
Well, that was a question, which one had to wipe out of his mind. One must not be inquisitive. It's sufficient that this is a woman who is loyal to me, who supports me, and who comes to visit me, who writes to me. That's sufficient.
What about in the same vein, the fact that, again, you think you might be in prison for life, and the idea that you might never make love to a woman again, that your sexuality would just atrophy? How do you deal with that in prison?
We never thought that we would die in jail. The morale was too high for that. We knew that one day would return.
But my question though is about sexuality. I mean, you're away from women. You're just with a group of men for all of these years. I mean,
oh well, one gets used to that. I was brought up in high schools, boarding schools, where you were without women for almost 6 months. You exercised discipline of yourself. And then when I went to prison, I resigned myself to the fact that I had no opportunity for sexual expression.
Is for the people of Britain to register on the widest possible scale their passionate protest against an evil and repulsive doctrine which says that a man's legal status, a man's political rights, a man's economic opportunities, a man's social position shall depend solely upon the color of his skin.
Then, in 1976, everything changed when black student protesters were shot and killed by security forces in the black township of Soweto. Suddenly, the whole world took notice, and pressure on the government from inside and outside the country quickly grew. By the mid-1980s, the momentum for change was unstoppable, and Nelson Mandela became a symbol for that change. The call for his release became a rallying cry around the world for all opposed to apartheid.
Nelson Mandela was larger than life. He was a symbol to all of us. He was an inspiration. We rallied around him, around his name, and we wanted to be like him, to give our all to the struggle.
The country was now in turmoil, the economy near collapse. South Africa had become a pariah nation to the rest of the world. The government knew it would have to deal with Nelson Mandela sooner or later. Its worst fear was that he would die in prison, making him a martyr to the cause. In 1985, it took a dramatic step. The government would release Nelson Mandela if he would renounce violence, but he rejected the offer categorically.
My father says, I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free.
James Gregory, he was my superior on a time in Paulsville prison. And when Mandela go for operation, he must be reported to Pretoria. Mandela's awake, he talked to us, he communicate, he's fine. And that day he want to go on weekend, he's in a hurry, and Mandela's operated, and Mandela don't want to come around, he's still sleeping. And then he said to him, Kafar, we're going to kill you, the whites is on you, and he swear him off. And Mandela, and try and think. And when he recovered later, Gregory was not there. Then he asked me later, he got a funny dream. I said, what dream, Mandela? He said he heard those voices, people calling Kafar, all that. I said, no, I didn't hear anything. Because I can't tell if Gregory had done that.
From 1984 onwards, the apartheid regime began to carefully reach out to ANC leaders. Speaking directly with terrorists was out of the question, but President Botha wanted to know what Mandela would do if granted parole. The Secret Service contacted Christo Brandt. His relationship with Mandela appeared useful. Brandt was asked to approach Mandela with a few specific questions.
I walked in and I was bugged. I showed him that I'm bugged.
That was the sign?
That's a sign. Before I even asked him, the sign was in my things, and I show him. And then I show him again, because that he can, and then he click, he show me, he's fine, he understand. And I ask him certain questions. That same evening on television, they repeated that type of things which I asked, and the response of Mandela, P.W. Botha gave his response on Mandela's response. Then I know, this question I asked Mandela, he answered me that, and P.W. Botha just talked the opposite what we asked him.
If Mandela were to say that he wanted constitutional change... He
does not want it. He stated it all over and over again.
Botha was a hardliner. If he had his way, Mandela would stay behind bars. But the increasing violence across the country and economic sanctions from the international community forced the regime to negotiate with the ANC. Meanwhile, the story of Nelson Mandela entered the spotlight yet again. He could walk with his guards through Cape Town no more.
People want to know more about Mandela. They want Mandela to release now. There was more oppression to Mandela's release. And then we become more security-wise. We take him in private cars, not in a government car, of a government ambulance, of a bakkie, a guard anymore, like a prisoner. He was in private clothes, also dressed, not in prison uniform anymore. We try to make him feel that he's part of the community and people not mustn't recognize him.
After almost 26 years in the Robben Island and Pollsmoor prisons, Christo Brandt escorted his prisoner to his next home, the Victor Verster prison. Nelson Mandela serves the last 2 years of his sentence in a villa formerly occupied by the prison director.
It was also for him strange, you know. When he walked one day in the kitchen, when we walked him out there, and I said, why a TV in the kitchen? Then he said, no, it's a microwave. Now he didn't understand the microwave. We show him how the thing worked. Let it warm up your food. He started learning new equipment.
Mandela could see how much the government needed him.
Mandela saw the climate changing. He saw the odiousness in which apartheid was held throughout the rest of the world. He saw the situation changing, the tide changing in his favor. He also saw some softening on the part of the government looking for a way out of this mess.
In 1985, Mandela initiated secret meetings with the government that would go on for 5 years. Meetings that would set the stage for the inevitable end of all-white rule. Slowly, the government began to prepare Mandela for his eventual release.
We now know that at that time, Mandela was actually being taken around the country quietly being prepared for his release, but he'd been lost from view for a whole generation. Nobody knew what he looked like. He turned up on beaches, he walked into shops, nobody recognized him. I mean, it really is a most extraordinary situation. Everybody around the world knew his name, but he could walk the streets of Cape Town and go unrecognized.
In September of 1989, with the election of the pragmatic F.W. de Klerk as president, events began to move faster than anyone expected. Within a month, Walter Sisulu and the others imprisoned for treason were released. Within 2 months, the government began to rescind apartheid laws. By the start of February 1990, the outlawed ANC was declared legal. And then, on the 10th of that month, came electrifying news.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February at about 3 p.m.
The atmosphere in the country that night was unimaginable. The next day, the most famous man in South Africa, but a man unseen for nearly 30 years, would emerge into the public light to change the nation's history. The moment had finally arrived. February 11th, 1990. After nearly 30 years, Nelson Mandela, now 71 years old, was at last a free man.
It just seemed like spring was happening in the middle of winter. Our people, I think, felt, hey, God, yes, loves us, man. God has heard us, and it's happening. And we are going to enter the promised land.
The country exploded in celebration. In Cape Town, more than 500,000 supporters, black, white, young and old, packed the central square to hear him speak for the first time in nearly 3 decades.
To hear this man who'd been kept away from us for all these years was the most amazing of emotions that many of us felt. For many people it was a dream come true.
I was completely overwhelmed by the enthusiasm. It's something I did not expect. And I would be merely rationalizing if I told you that I'm able to describe my own feelings. It was breathtaking.
The change in Nelson Mandela's life was hard to comprehend. He'd spent the better part of 30 years in the bowels of a South African prison. Now he was a star. But however great his negotiating skills, he could not save his unraveling relationship with his wife. As Winnie had become more autocratic and radical over the years, her public image had deteriorated. Now she was linked to the kidnapping and assault of a young boy, which ended in his death. Criminal charges were lodged against her. She was convicted of the kidnapping, but received a suspended sentence and a fine. Throughout the ordeal, Mandela stood by her, but then new scandals unfolded, including an affair with her young lawyer and allegations of financial misdealings.
He's a man of tremendous, tremendous loyalty, and he felt that Winnie had stuck by him for 27 years while he was in prison after just a few years of marriage, and he was going to stick by her come hell or high water.
Master of Ceremonies, distinguished artist, members of the International Reception Committee, dear friends here and elsewhere in the world, our first symbol and habitus is to say thank you. Thank you very much to you all.
thank you that you chose to care. Because you could have decided when, by ending the system of white minority domination, humanity will have ensured that never again shall the scourge of racial tyranny raise its ugly head. You will all be welcome. You will all be welcome to attend those historic victory celebrations. I cannot complete my speech without referring to our comrade President Oliver Tambo. As you know, Comrade Oliver Tambo is recovering in a clinic in Sweden. I saw him in March this year and was happy to see that he has made a remarkable progress in his illness. We know it is your desire, in fact your prayers and wishes, that he should recover as speedily and completely so that he can come back and lead this organization again. On my left is his beloved wife, Adelaide Tambo. In wishing our leader complete recovery, we at the same time would like to assure her that we are fully behind her and the family in their moment of concern. There is no man in this country and anywhere else in the world who could have performed as magnificently as he has done over the last 30 years. He kept our organization united and strong under the most difficult conditions. And we say, therefore, that our prayers are that he should be able to recover sufficiently to take his position of leadership of this organization. Finally, I want to tell you, as I have told many other meetings before that we respect you, we admire you, and above all, we love you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Clinton.
President Mandela, members of the South African delegation, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. We are here to welcome Nelson Mandela back to the United States, but first to the United States as the President of his nation. Now all over the world, there are three words which, spoken together, express the triumph of freedom, democracy, and hope for the future. They are President Nelson Mandela.
South Africa is located many thousands of miles away from the United States. What happens there ought to be no interest to the people of this country. You fought battles of freedom and won your independence. But the striking feature of what is happening today is that in almost every country, men and women have emerged who regard the entire world, every part of the globe, as the battlefield for their activities in the fight for the preservation of human rights. That fight is joined by people across the seas, in whatever area of the world there is suppression of human rights. We are the beneficiaries of that generations that have chosen the world as the theater of their operations. The people of the United States, black and white, have joined in the battle to liberate South Africa.
So as we toured the island, I couldn't help but think about how...
Mr. Obama escorted his family on a tour of Mandela's former prison on Robben Island this June, writing in the guestbook that the jail's heroes remind us that no shackles or cells can match the strength of the human spirit.
At his trial in 1964, Nelson Mandela closed his statement from the dock saying, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." And Nelson Mandela lived for that ideal, and he made it real. He achieved more than could be expected of any man. And today he's gone home. And we've lost one of the most influential, courageous, and profoundly good human beings that any of us will share time with on this earth. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages. Through his fierce dignity and unbending will to sacrifice his own freedom for the freedom of others, Madiba transformed South Africa and moved all of us. His journey from a prisoner to a president embodied the promise that human beings and countries can change for the better. His commitment to transfer power and reconcile with those who jailed him set an example that all humanity should aspire to, whether in the lives of nations or our own personal lives. And the fact that he did it all with grace and good humor and an ability to acknowledge his own imperfections only makes the man that much more remarkable. As he once said, "I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." I am one of the countless millions who drew inspiration from Nelson Mandela's life. My very first political action, the first thing I ever did that involved an issue or a policy or politics, was a protest against apartheid. I would study his words and his writings. The day he was released from prison gave me a sense of what human beings can do when they're guided by their hopes and not by their fears. And like so many around the globe, I cannot fully imagine my own life without the example that Nelson Mandela set. And so long as I live, I will do what I can to learn from him. To Gracia Michel and his family, Michelle and I extend our deepest sympathy and gratitude for sharing this extraordinary man with us. His life's work meant long days away from those who loved him most. And I only hope that the time spent with him these last few weeks brought peace and comfort to his family. To the people of South Africa, we draw strength from the example of renewal and reconciliation and resilience that you made real. A free South Africa at peace with itself. That's an example to the world. And that's Madiba's legacy to the nation that he loved. We will not likely see the likes of Nelson Mandela again. So it falls to us as best we can to follow the example that he set. To make decisions guided not by hate but by love. To never discount the difference that one person can make. To strive for a future that is worthy of his sacrifice. For now, let us pause and give thanks for the fact that Nelson Mandela lived. A man who took history in his hands and bent the arc of the moral universe towards justice. May God bless his memory and keep him in peace.
His day is done, is done. The news came on the wings of a wind reluctant to carry its burden. Nelson Mandela's day is done. The news expected and still unwelcome reached us in the United States, and suddenly our world became somber. Our skies were leadened. His day is done. We see you, South African people, standing speechless at the slamming of that final door through which no traveler returns. Our spirits reach out to you, Bantu, Zulu, Xhosa, Boer. We think of you and your son of Africa, your father, your one more wonder of the world. We send our souls to you as you reflect upon your David, armed with a mere stone, facing down the mighty Goliath. Your man of strength, Gideon, emerging triumphant, although born into the brutal embrace of apartheid, scarred by the savage atmosphere of racism, unjustly imprisoned in the bloody maws of South African dungeons. Would the man survive? Could the man survive? His answer strengthened men and women around the world. In the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, in Chicago's Loop, in New Orleans' Mardi Gras, in New York City's Times Square. We watched as the hope of Africa sprang through the prison's doors, his stupendous heart intact, his gargantuan will hale and hearty. He had not been crippled by brutes, nor was his passion for the rights of human beings diminished by 27 years of imprisonment. Even here in America, we felt the cool, refreshing breeze of freedom when Nelson Mandela took the seat of presidency in his country, where formerly he was not even allowed to vote. We were enlarged by tears of pride as we saw Nelson Mandela's former prison guards invited courteously by him to watch from the front rows his inauguration. We saw him accept the World's Award in Norway with the grace and gratitude of the Solon in ancient Roman courts and the confidence of African chiefs from ancient royal stools. No sun outlasts its sunset, but will rise again and bring the dawn. Yes, Mandela's day is done, yet we, his inheritors, will open the gates wider for reconciliation, and we will respond generously to the cries of blacks and whites, Asian, Hispanics, the poor who live piteously on the floor of our planet. He has offered us understanding. We will not withhold forgiveness, even from those who do not ask. Nelson Mandela's day is done. We confess it in tearful voices, yet we lift our own to say thank you. Thank you, our Gideon. Thank you, our David, our great courageous man. We will not forget you. We will not dishonor you. We will remember and be glad that you lived among us, that you taught us, and that you loved us.
If you call out loud, will it get inside? Through the heart of your surrender to your alibis, and you can say the words like you understand. But the power's in believing, so give yourself a chance, 'cause you can climb the highest mountain, swim the deepest sea. All you need is the wind. self-esteem. So keep the faith.
Good morning, evening, friends. Here's your friendly announcer. I have serious news to pass on to everybody. What I'm about to say could mean the world's disaster, could change your joy and laughter today.